There is a figure that crosses cultures, centuries, and symbolism. A being that lives on the border between what is known and what has no name yet. It is ancient, and antiquity, for those who know how to read it, is synonymous with depth. There is a moment, sometimes, when the entire forest stops. Not for long, a few seconds. The wind settles, the birds fall silent at the same time without apparent reason, and there is a moment of complete silence. The kind of silence that almost never happens because nature, like life, is almost always making some sound. Most of us, in that moment, wait for the sound to return. Because silence, for most of us, is the absence of something, an interval between two moments of sound, a pause that will be filled, a temporary void before normality returns. But there is another way to receive that moment, and that is what we explore today. What if silence is not the absence of anything, but the presence of something that noise normally covers? Let's enter this question slowly, and whenever possible throughout this video, leave enough space for it not just to be heard, but to be felt. Have you ever been in complete silence? No music, no conversation, no television, no background sound, and, after some time, felt a discomfort that is difficult to name? Not exactly fear, not exactly boredom, something more like restlessness, a feeling that something needs to be filled, an almost physical urge to break the silence. Turn something on, say something, move something before it goes on too long. And maybe you have also noticed the opposite. That moment, usually rare, usually unexpected, when silence arrives, and instead of discomfort, there is relief. A feeling of rest you didn't even realize you needed. As if a part of you that had been working constantly in the background could finally stop. These two experiences of the same silence, one uncomfortable, one restorative, are not contradictory. They point to something about what silence actually is. Because external silence, the absence of sound around you, does not automatically create internal silence. And it is internal silence, or its absence, that determines whether external silence feels like unbearable emptiness or like rest. When external silence arrives and the internal noise does not follow, when the mind continues its usual activity without anything external to mask it, the result is discomfort. Because suddenly you can hear what was always there. And when external and internal silence meet, when, for some reason, the mind also quiets, something else entirely appears. So perhaps the question is not about silence itself. Perhaps it is about what silence reveals when the noise that normally covers it, both external and internal, stops, even for a moment. We live surrounded by sound in a way that has become so constant it is almost invisible. Music while working, podcasts while walking, television while eating even when not really watching, notifications, conversations, the constant background hum of almost every space we inhabit. And there is a question we rarely ask. What exactly is all this sound doing? One answer is that it entertains us, informs us, accompanies us. But there is another answer, more uncomfortable and perhaps more honest for many people many times. The sound is protecting us from something. There is a well-known psychological experiment that has gained attention in recent years. Researchers asked participants to sit alone in a room with no phone, no book, nothing to do, just their own thoughts, for a relatively short period of time, 15 minutes. And participants were given an option. If they preferred, they could receive a mild electric shock during that time, uncomfortable but not dangerous, by pressing a button. A significant number of participants chose the shock. They chose physical pain over being alone with their own thoughts in silence for 15 minutes. This experiment is not saying these people are weak or that something is wrong with them. It is revealing something about our general relationship with silence, especially the silence of being alone with our own mind. For many people, most of the time, this silence is not experienced as peace. It is experienced as exposure. Because noise, external and internal, constant activity, music, notifications, thoughts about what needs to be done, functions like a curtain. And while the curtain is closed, you do not have to see what is behind it. Silence opens the curtain. And what appears can be many things. Can be unprocessed sadness, It can be a question about life that has not been given space. It can be the raw sensation of being alive, which, for some people at certain times, is more intense than they can comfortably process without distraction. In the Christian contemplative tradition, especially in a 14th century anonymous text called the Cloud of Unknowing, there is a very specific description of this process. The text describes contemplative practice as placing a cloud of forgetting between you and all habitual thoughts, not to suppress them forcefully, but to let them pass without engagement. And the author is honest about what happens. At first, it feels like nothing is happening except uncomfortable emptiness. Thoughts continue. It is described as the natural process of the mind adapting to a kind of space it rarely experiences. And over time, this same space that seemed empty begins to reveal a different quality. Not emptiness, but something without an easy name, which the text calls, with humility, unknowing. And Taoism points in a complementary direction through a completely different language. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the wheel where spokes meet in a hub. It is the empty space at the center that allows the wheel to function. Without that emptiness, there is no movement, no usefulness. It speaks of a clay vessel, shaped around empty space. It is the emptiness that makes it a vessel. It speaks of a room, walls, doors, roof, but it is the empty space inside that makes it livable. The conclusion is direct. What is there is useful. But what is not there, emptiness, space, silence, is what makes it useful. When the Cloud of Unknowing and the Tao Te Ching point in such different ways to the same idea, that emptiness is not the absence of value but its condition, it may be worth taking this beyond theory. Because if this is true of a bowl, a wheel, a room, it may also be true of you. What if the question, why is silence uncomfortable, already contains an assumption worth questioning? The assumption is this: that silence is empty. That empty means nothing is there. And therefore, discomfort is just a reaction to nothing. But what if discomfort has a source? What if it is not a reaction to nothing, but a reaction to something very specific that silence reveals? Think again about the shock experiment. People did not choose the shock because silence was literally nothing. They chose it because inside that silence, something appeared. A thought, a feeling, a perception about their own life that was more uncomfortable than brief physical pain. Silence did not create it. It revealed what was already there but normally covered. And this completely changes the interpretation of discomfort. If silence were truly empty, if there were nothing in it, there would be nothing to cause discomfort. Pure emptiness does not hurt. It simply is not anything. But discomfort exists. And discomfort is almost always a response to something present. So paradoxically, silence is fuller than noise. Noise, music, notifications, constant conversation, distraction is what is empty, in the sense that it is not necessarily connected to what is actually happening inside you. It is a layer on top, a distraction in the literal sense, something that pulls attention away. Silence is what remains when that layer is removed. Not nothing, but what has always been there. So the question changes completely. It is no longer, why is silence uncomfortable? It becomes, what is silence showing me? And what would happen if I stayed with it just a little longer instead of turning away? This question has no universal answer. What silence reveals is different for each person, and different at each moment of life. For some, it is unprocessed sadness. For others, a question about direction. For others still, the raw intensity of being alive without commentary or distraction. And there is a subtle but enormous difference between avoiding silence because it is empty and avoiding it because it is actually too full of what we are not ready to face. The first story says, silence has nothing to offer. The second says, silence has something to offer, and maybe you are not ready yet, and that is okay, but maybe instead of avoiding it completely, you can approach it a little more each time. That there is something in silence that language cannot reach, and that this is not a flaw of silence, but a feature of what it contains. The via negativa, apophatic theology, developed in Christian mysticism and other traditions, begins with a paradox. The most honest way to speak about what is most real, God, the absolute, the ground of being, is not to say what it is. It is to say what it is not, because any positive description necessarily limits it, places it into a conceptual box that cannot contain what it refers to. And the way to approach what cannot be described is not through more words. It is through silence, not as absence of the divine, but as the only space wide enough for what has no limits. Think of an experience you have had, beauty, love, grief, that always becomes smaller when you try to describe it. Words point toward it, but they never fully arrive. And sometimes the most honest sharing is not more explanation. It is shared silence, where something is communicated more directly than language allows. Silence, in this view, is not where communication fails. It is where a different kind of communication becomes possible. And Taoism again offers a concrete image. A bowl is not less because it is empty. It is a bowl because it is empty. A mind permanently full of noise, commentary, anticipation is not more complete. It is a mind that has temporarily lost its capacity to receive. Silence restores that capacity, not as belief but as perception, something noticed over time, that after enough silence something shifts. A sensation of relief you did not know you needed. A clarity that did not come from thinking harder, but from space finally being available. The alchemy of the fox finds here its most paradoxical form. Alchemy is about transformation inside a vessel under heat over time. But many traditions also speak of the sealed vessel, the container that must remain undisturbed for transformation to occur. Not inactivity, but the condition for something to happen that cannot happen under constant interruption. Silence, then, is that sealed vessel. Not empty, but in process, in a way that only happens when it is not interrupted. There is an experience you may have had without naming it. That moment when, in the middle of noise, a city, a gathering, a busy environment, you suddenly notice a quietness underneath everything. Not because sound stopped, but because your attention stopped being fully absorbed by it. This reveals something important. Silence is not necessarily the absence of external sound. It is a quality of presence that can exist regardless of conditions. And that means silence does not need to be sought only in quiet places. It can be found in any place at any moment as this underlying space. Not easily, not instantly. The mind does not settle just because it is told to. But there is a simple practice, not as productivity, not as optimization, but as invitation. Several times during your day, even for a few seconds, pause. Not to fix anything, not to solve anything. Just stop and notice what is here when you stop adding anything to the moment. At first, discomfort may appear. Something may arise, a feeling, a thought that you were not expecting. And instead of immediately escaping it, you might simply notice, this was here, and stay with it just a little longer than you normally would. Because silence is not asking to be filled. It is offering patiently a space. And what you do with that space changes something fundamental. Not the world, but your relationship to what is always already present. The fox, in the clearing, is no longer waiting for silence to return. She realizes it never left. It was there before sound stopped. It is there after sound returns. It is always there, not as absence, but as the space in which everything else can exist. The question that remains is not meant to be answered, but carried. Next time silence arrives, by accident or intention, what happens if you stay just a little longer? What is waiting beneath the noise to be heard? If something here moved within you, if you felt that space beneath sound, it may be worth continuing along this path. And if you want, write in the comments what you noticed the last time you stayed in silence longer than usual. I am sure your words will give someone else permission to do the same. Silence is not empty. It is the space where everything else can exist. And it is here. It has always been here, waiting without urgency to be noticed.